You're entering Corsi Nation.
This is Jerome Corsi, and today it is Monday. It's January 12th, 2026. Thanks for joining us in Corsi Nation. You can see I'm still in transition. I don't have the books behind me. I've had to leave my home of 32 years after the divorce, and I'm transitioning to purchase a new home, reunite with my daughter, and recreate what's left of the family. My wife decided to have an affair after 32 years and engage in a divorce. I'm finding across the country marriages that are breaking up after long term. I think we're really at a crisis in this country with the amount of feminism that's been developed over going back since the 50s. Now, a large number of women, including women in long-term marriages, are divorcing. And it's pretty shocking, actually, the breakup of the family and the attacks that have been going on across the country with this anti-ICE protest, which we're going to cover in a minute. But it goes all back to the 1950s. If you'd read my book on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, you can see that what we're living through today has been architected since the 1950s in the United States, with the Communist Party deciding that rubbing raw racial tensions or any tensions that exist in a society is a way to produce the chaos that will break down the society, destroy traditional values, and lead us into their glorious communist revolution, in which we're all slaves, and they have no free speech allowed of anyone except for these radicals. Now, I want to show you what the radicals really are like. And this Nick Sartor, one of the citizen journalists, and his associate were attacked in their car in Minneapolis. And you can see with this what the mostly nonviolent protesters are doing. You can see this is now we're at Antifa level. And the point I'm going to make is one that J.D. Rucker is making right now, and I think he's exactly right, which is that the globalists, the anti-American neo-Marxist and cultural Maoists have decided that since there was a lot of investigation going on of the Democratic Party fraud with regards to Somalia, that the only way to reverse that was to have a George Floyd incident and to then flood the streets with Antifa, paid protesters, trained paid protesters with their methodologies that date back to 2020, exact same methodologies, and to change the subject so the United States populace wouldn't focus on the massive amounts of fraud, where the Democratic Party has become, as many are saying, the party of fraud, have learned how to steal trillions of dollars from the Treasury in order to fund their anti-American causes. Let's run the video. Let's let everybody see what exactly is going on. Go ahead, Chris, play the video. This is Nick Sartor trapped in his car with the mob in Minnesota around him. You can see the mob all around the car with their flashlights and cell phone lights, and they're all hooded. They're writing things on the car. They're the windows. Tap on the car. They tell them want to kill them. Nick Sartor and his associate.
Get out of the way! Get out of the way!
They jump on the car. He tries to get going. Someone pulls the car right in front of him. Try to block him. And he goes behind that car. Then he came out of the trap. He's showing you what his pickup truck looks like. You can see in the back there's graffiti that they wrote all over it saying bitch and all kinds of nonsense. And you can see the car has been spray painted with white paint and black paint. In the back, you can see there's water bottles back there, by the way, of frozen water, which is an anti-fa trick. They are supplied with frozen water bottles, which can be then hurled like bricks at cars to break windows. Windows were broken in Sartor's car. And the aftermath of this is Sartor and his friend were arrested by the police, not the protesters in Minneapolis. Sartor was arrested for working his way out of that protest, even though his life was at stake. I mean, so that this violent clash with the anti-ICE protesters, who were really just Antifa, paid protesters, trained, paid protesters with moves that we've seen before, blocking highways, blocking cars, attacking people in their vehicles, assaulting people, obscenities and massive obscenities, acting righteous as if they are, protecting the pure and innocent. This is not Martin Luther King. This is not the blacks suffering economic and other forms of oppression in the 1950s that Martin Luther King, with nonviolent protests, following the laws, was able to establish a moral movement showing America that the opposition and the discrimination against blacks needed to be stopped. But that protection of legitimate protesting has now morphed into the protecting of this violent, Marxist, destructive protesting, which is aimed at destroying America. And it's funded by the left, which, as I've been saying, has been funded through the border crimes. You cannot run all the child sex trade. You cannot run fentanyl trade and trade in marijuana and mostly now cocaine, unless you've got the banks. You can't run around with cartels with pickup trucks full of $100 bills. They have to get that money into the banking system. I caught HSBC in 2011 money laundering for the Mexican drug cartels. And it was finally, they had a bank officer from Long Island who had records of people's accounts being, their names and their social security numbers being taken by the bank. Bank HSBC was running millions of dollars through the accounts and closing the accounts at zero. All they were doing was taking money laundering it. The House Special Investigating Committee contacted me, and they wrote a multi-hundred-page report on how the HSBC was doing the money laundering. Department of Justice, Loretta Lynch fame, was the one who fined HSBC and the Department of Justice $1.9 billion. Nobody went to jail. Same thing, we have reports here that I continue to read from the Department of Justice, and this is in 2020. This report was dated 2024, October 10th. The Department of Justice noted that from January 1, 2018 to April 12, 2024, that's 6 years, TD Bank excluded all domestic automated clearinghouse transactions, most checking activities, and numerous other transactions from its money laundering monitoring system. So 92% of the total transaction volume went unmonitored for 6 years, amounting to over 18.3 trillion in transaction activity. Well, how much of that money do you think was money laundered? How much do you think was drug cartel money? How much ended up in Act Blue, where the Act Blue executives, according to whistleblowers, have been buying houses for millions of dollars, then getting mortgage loans, and tens of millions of dollars, which they put into funding Democratic Party NGOs that advance election fraud, that want to fund Antifa, and destroy America, and fund anti-ICE. Chris, I want you to comment on this in a minute, but what we're seeing here with these protests is a repeat of 2020. And I think if the American people look at this, the American people are not in sympathy with these attacks on law enforcement. As the attacks get more and more violent, and of course, Donald Trump is saying, oh, you cannot, these people have a right to protest. You get people from their houses in Minneapolis coming out and screaming at ICE to get obscenities, to get out of our state. These people are brainwashed. They don't realize that what they're doing is supporting a communist revolution. And the end result will be the same as Venezuela or Cuba, where the initial, Chavez factions or the Castro were supported by the people as liberators, when in fact all we were doing was seizing power in order to establish their communist terrorism dictatorships, in which millions of people lost their rights and were killed. That's what we're facing today. But yet, the power of this, the moral justification asserted by these protesters, but who with impunity in New York City will chant, they want to kill ICE. Well, these people need to be arrested. This is not free speech. This is over the top. This is insurrection. And this needs to be branded as insurrection. These people need to be seen as terrorists and as traitors to the United States, wanting to destroy the country. Starting with the Occupy movement, we've been having this far left Marxist destruction of America through violence. And it's now become a repeat pattern that morphed from the days of Martin Luther King and the anti-war protests of the 1960s into what is today organized Antifa, destructive politics that I think I best described and are best understood if you would just read The Truth About Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. Chris, you can show the title of the book, and come on, let's have a discussion about this. Let's discuss this for a minute or two before we move on to some other topics.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah. So, hey, one thing, did you notice that the left, the media, has done a really good job of Trayvon Martining this Renee Good,
Yes.
who was killed? They have that
Yes.
picture of her from years upon years ago, where she was a mom, and there are some other issues apparently with that. And they don't have the one where she looks like a radicalized feminist with the cropped hair and everything, and the uniform Judith Butler cropped hair and the glasses and everything else. The anger at her. Nope. It had to be the cute picture from a long time ago, kind of like Trayvon Martin's 12-year-old picture. This is how they do it. This is how they try to sway public opinion. This is why journalism. This is why they're whining at CBS over Barry Weiss, who says, "No, I'm going to quash a story if you don't get to the other side of the story."
Right.
Yeah. You have to actually perform journalism. It's a lost art.
Well, there's no journalism being done today in America, except for maybe the podcasters and those who are trying to get down to the truth. But CNN, Donald Trump, even on his press conference coming back this weekend, it was about a 32-minute press conference. Called out the CNN reporter, said, "Who do you work for?" And she said, I work for the Washington Pool. So what network is it? Oh, CNN. So why didn't you say CNN? They called them out as fake news and all the rest of it. But again, there's the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy, which I think is one of the better books I've written. It's a little difficult to read. You have to work through the evolution of this political philosophy to get to the point where the Antifa is viewed as the high moral ground, when in fact all they are is Marxist paid thugs. Chris?
I was funny. I was listening to WOR at one point, a long time ago, when they had Joe Bartlett was the news director, doing morning radio with one of the hosts, and I believe it was gambling. It was that morning. It was a gambling one morning. I believe it was in 2013, somewhere around there. Whereas Bartlett and him were discussing journalism. The idea was gambling was saying they should actually report the news and let the listener or viewer decide. Well, Bartlett says, well, there's something that journalists do follow generally, and they use this when it comes to telling stories. It's called comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, which again, those two sides are very subjective if that's the case. What the idea is, and when I was taking journalism courses in college, this was it's relevant because it was 89, 90, 91, 92. That's when a lot of the older journalists or the people my age were trained. A lot of these people who you see now on television, they're learning from professors who taught the idea of activist journalism, who thought it would be better to tell a story rather than to report the news. And this is what we have now. We actually have sensationalized news, which is generally put to one side. That's basically to try to sway public opinion, if you will, rather than make them ask questions.
It became the development of narratives.
Yes, that's it.
Narratives were politically crafted messages that were like psychological operations. And so therefore the news was exploited in order to develop narratives that would be weaponized in order to mobilize the public in a particular direction, usually a radical direction. Give up power because of 9/11, submit to COVID. It goes on and on.
Right, and discredit any sources that oppose the narrative. There are two things that happened. That fellow Nick Shirley, who exposed the Somali fraud. Well, liberal journalists were. Well, I'm sure they were seething with jealousy, but they were saying, no, that's the wrong kind of journalism. Where you shouldn't have said that. And Walz's daughter was saying, well, they had a moral obligation not to report this, but it was a story. Then you had there was another one. I was watching Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan talking to Tom Homan. Homan buried her with all her silly questions. He's a straight shooter. The guy just said, "Hey, look at what happened from the agent's point of view. No one should have been dead. We didn't want anybody to be dead. No one ever wants that. But this guy was dragged by a car before that. He feared for his life. And
the car. I've seen some videos of it where the car
turned right into him.
Turned right into him. She would have hit him, except that the wheels spun on the ice.
Well, he was dragged by a car about 6 months ago. The agent during a protest. But what happened at the end of this interview? Brennan took the last minute, obviously right at the end, to ask the stupid question that journalists are asking to try to discredit Tom Homan about the bag, the already debunked lie that he accepted a bribe. But they keep asking it just to discredit everything he said in the eyes of the viewer.
Yeah, a constant. This is not news, and Trump is right to belittle these people. I've traveled with the press when I did in 2012 with Romney when his presidential campaign. And, these kids who were reporting for the New York Times and the Washington Post, all they wanted to do was see who had the best gotcha story against Trump.
That's how you get your bonuses. You make your bonus that way.
Yeah, the whole game was who could have the best gotcha story, who could the best, something to this time. At this point, it was really aimed at propping up Obama in his last term, and anybody like myself who demonstrated that Obama did not have a birth certificate. We found the one from which Obama's birth certificate from which Obama's in Hawaii had been copied. Mainstream media ignored it. Arpaio ran a press conference about it. He spent years investigating it and involved foreign forensic examination of it, none of which made any impact on the mainstream media, not because it wasn't true, but because they didn't want to cover the story. It didn't fit the narrative. Right. It didn't fit the political objectives they were trying to achieve, which was to get Obama reelected in 2016, or 12 rather. They achieved it. Not that Romney was all that great a candidate, and Romney and Ryan were not the best, two basically rhinos proposing to run for office. It wasn't until Donald Trump shot up on the scene in 2015 that we had a real candidate that could oppose this agenda.
Oh, funny thing. Remember 2012? The left did their best to discredit anybody they didn't want running against Barack Obama. So when Herman Cain became a front runner,
right,
they magically dug up something on him. They found it, and then he had to resign in disgrace. Donald Trump actually was a front runner for a period of time during the 2012 primary. The problem was when he was in first place, he dropped out.
Yeah,
and that was another issue too. I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but I suppose he took the 2016 primary a little more seriously.
Well, then you also had this U-Haul driver who went through the protests in Los Angeles. Now, the protests in Los Angeles, I guess, were to support the Iranian regime. It's very confusing, but what the protest truck, the U-Haul, was all about was saying that they didn't want a Shah, they didn't want mullahs, they didn't want to return to the Shah. Because as soon as the protesters are in the streets in Iran, Tehran, Pahlavi, who is the descendant of the former Shah, comes out and starts making speeches to grab political power. Now, the point is, I think that in 2009, when the Iranians were in the street protesting, I was in Israel at that time, and I, as I've reported this before, I had a meeting with Simon Peres in his hotel room in Tel Aviv. He was watching the protests in Iran. They asked me at that time if I thought the protesters would succeed in toppling the Iranian regime. I said no, because they weren't going to get any support from Obama. And Obama said not a word about the protesters. In fact, he gave a speech in Cairo saying he had experienced Islam on 3 continents, finally admitting what he had denied all through the 2008 campaign. So we are seeing that the Democratic Party has deteriorated into being this party of screaming, lying, cheating, stealing. They can only win elections through stealing. All they do is destroy the cities with Antifa. They're running these leftist, there's nothing left of the Democratic Party except to fund itself through theft and stealing from the federal government to support, or stealing through working with organized crime and the CIA. I mean, we do not, when the government becomes criminal, when the government itself becomes Marxist, when the people in the United States are being informed by a neo-Marxist or neo-Maoist, cultural Maoist press, it's hard to see how we won't lose all of our freedoms, because these people have no intention of quitting. They're a very small minority, but they're very vocal, and they can command the news by their violence and their disrespect. And they presume to have the higher ground at all times. Okay, now, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, she blasted the Democrats on sanctuary cities and said ICE is going to continue its work. ICE is going to continue deporting. And eventually President Trump will do something if these riots continue or escalate, in order to bring out the troops if he has to, in order to create a situation in which ICE can do its work without these protests. The protest cycle ends when law enforcement makes it clear that the protesters are going to be arrested, charged with crimes, and put in prison for a long period of time. Otherwise, it doesn't end. It was the same with the race riots of the 1960s. They didn't end until the National Guard was called into these cities, and legal consequences had to be faced for rioting. We're going to have to do that again. And, the idea of allowing these reporters from CNN and others to advance this narrative with the lies that they're telling is preposterous. Chris, do you want to comment on it?
Again, this is nothing new with the news media we have in New York. New York, of course, but also across America. It's like you said earlier. A lot of times it's about getting the gotcha story, getting the viral moment these days, getting that promotion, getting the recognition. A lot of other times it's falling in line to protect the narrative, if you will, because that's basically what I'd say the fifth column does.
Well, the Nancy Pelosi, has gone through saying, this. She wrote on January 7th that this killing of an unarmed woman by a masked federal agent in Minneapolis is a moral outrage and betrayal of American values. There's been no justification offered, only deception and deflection from those in charge. Accountability for this killing is not optional. That's the same Nancy Pelosi. I'm reading from an article here by J.B. Shurk, Shurk, S-H-U-R-K. It's on the Discern Report. And he says the same Nancy Pelosi, who spent the last 5 years defending U.S. Capitol Police Captain Michael Byrd after he shot and killed unarmed J6 protester Ashley Babbitt without any prior warning. The pictures from the time are accurate. Byrd was wearing a COVID mask when he took Air Force veteran Babbitt's life. And the juxtaposition of the two incidents is jarring. Pelosi spent the last 5 years applauding Byrd as a hero and condemning unarmed Babbitt as an insurrectionist, and claiming that Trump supporters hate the police. Now she condemns the federal agent's heroic actions as outrage, defends a woman armed with a vehicle as being unarmed, and accuses federal law enforcement of betrayal, deception, and deflection. In both cases, the federal agents wore a mask, but Pelosi makes ICE agents' use of a mask sound nefarious. Okay, and so they go through this with all of the Adam Schiff, all the Democrats in general, how they are complete hypocrites when it comes on to these issues. And their morals are shaped, their sympathy, their saying that these are the aggrieved parties, are shaped entirely by their hatred of America and their hatred of Donald Trump. They've become essentially traitors to America. We have a Democratic Party that is a criminal enterprise funded by fraud, funded by illegal activity on the border, whose goal is to support Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and other violent NGOs in order to destroy America. And we're tolerating the Democratic Party as if it has a legitimate right to exist.
Well,
Time-
let's
Go
go
ahead.
back to your book. Let's go back to your book, The Truth About Neo-Marxism, the whole thing. The idea is communists, or let's say Marxists, try to find the society's ingrates, try to find a way to unite them one way or another. Well, a good way to unite them is make them believe that the people that somebody they think is representative of the enemy has killed one of them in cold blood, rather than the whole instigated, everything being instigated, the whole matter. Over the last many years, they tried to turn the U.S. into like this social experiment petri dish to satisfy very small enclaves of people, but brought them together to form a voting bloc of ingrates. This is how Marxists take over, because they find people that will say, "Hey, I'm going to trade you my policies, so we'll just back you in public." They won't really do anything, but they'll back them in public to make these people think they can do whatever they want. And that's how Marxists take control.
There's a good article out. It's by M.D. Kittle. It was published, I guess, originally in December. But 25 Lies of the Democratic Party, of the Democratic Radical Marxist left. And this Maryland man, for instance, this Kilmer Abrego Garcia, who made a career out of smuggling fellow illegal immigrants. And law enforcement officials in 2019 found him with rolls of cash and drugs, hang out with murderers, members of the vicious MS-13 gang. And the Department of Homeland Security detailed that Abrego Garcia's wife sought a protective order against him, saying he physically abused her. But when the Trump administration deported this criminal illegal immigrant, Abrego Garcia was transformed into a Maryland man by shameless liars like Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen. The Democrats, assisted by shameless corporate media, painted a picture of a gentle migrant wrongfully caught in the Department of Homeland Security's cruel campaign to round up undocumented and remove them from their adopted country. Department of Homeland Security rightly called out the twisted narrative for what it was, one of the biggest lies of 2025. Quote, Kilmer Abrego Garcia is not and never will be a Maryland man. He's a criminal illegal alien from El Salvador and a public safety threat. A senior DHS official said in August last year, Democrats and liberal activist federal judges have chosen to stand by their phony, quote, Maryland man in defense of the separation of powers in pursuit of paralyzing President Trump's campaign promise to clean up illegal immigration mess the Democrats left him. And again, it's interesting. I was reminded of Elliot Spitzer. If you remember him, he was a district attorney, I believe, in New York, and he was always was praised for wanting to stop crime and his virtue and his positive family values. He was picked up in private investigators looking into a organized prostitution ring, and he was using the prostitutes. Became famous. He liked to have sex with the prostitutes with his socks still on. But he was found through his cell phone, his communications with various people in the prostitute community, criminals that he was dealing with. It was exposed. These judges are being talked to by the far left. They're being funded. their cell phones and their laptops would convict them of being traitorous to the United States. And it wouldn't take much of a campaign or an investigation to really find out who these judges are. And if it could be done by private investigators with Elliot Spitzer, it can be done with official investigations into these people to find out what their source of money is and where they're getting all of their encouragement to be anti-American. And it goes on and on and on. The shipwrecked sailors who were the drug dealers from Venezuela who were in the water and abandoned because the ships had been attacked, but they weren't yet killed. Trump was also very vigorous on the airplane presser about talking about how Greenland, we needed to take Greenland because if we didn't, Russia or China would. And the whole defense of the hemisphere, I think, is a very important part of what Trump is doing. I want to conclude this by saying that over the weekend, we also attacked again these rebel factors in Syria. Syria is a mess. And the destabilization of Syria is largely what led to flooding Europe with Muslims, which has not ceased. And it was like Venezuela flooding the United States and El Salvador, and Obama and Biden flooding the United States with Mexican and other countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Venezuela, criminals, known criminals. All of these lies that have been told by the mainstream media that Ukraine is on the verge of victory, right? Okay, that they want to erase and forget about the auto pen presidency. Okay, nearly every House Democrat voted against the bill requiring documentary proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. Democrats insist there's no need for the Save America Act, the Safeguard America and Voter Eligibility Act, because federal law already makes it a felony for a non-citizen to vote in federal elections. But that's a flawed honor system. Non-citizens show up on state voter rolls across the country and claim they're citizens. Nobody does anything about it. Or they get through motor voter or other ways the Democrats find to get illegals to vote. And the Democrats do not want to change that system because they can't win elections without it. It goes on and on and on of how these lies have been weaponized by the Democrats in order to cause chaos and confusion. The Democratic Party has become a dangerous party to the United States of America, and it needs to be investigated as a treasonous party. Obama needs to be investigated for his coup d'etat. If you take a look at what we're doing with God's 5 stones, we're increasingly investigating the threats to children, the open border crimes that are committed by Obama and Biden, the coup d'etat from Biden and Obama in 2020, along with Hillary Clinton. I've been writing about this for 25 years. My book, Coup d'etat, showing that the entire Russian collusion was made up by Hillary and by Obama. It had no basis in fact. We're coming to a point where I think the American people are realizing the Democratic Party has Act Blue, the Act Blue political corruption. These things are not getting fully reported. They need to be fully reported. We're going to continue to do so here, and we'll be continuing to do podcasts for as long as we can. I'll be transitioning by the end of this month, hopefully into a new home and reestablish my life with my family, what's left of my family, and move back into a more normal situation where I've created the investment banking, LeChance Capital Partners. I'm working now in investment banking, trying to get that to succeed. And I greatly appreciate the support that this audience has given me over the years. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi today. It's Monday. It's January 12th, 2026. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. But what it will take is our adherence to 2 Chronicles 7:14, when we get on our knees and ask God to forgive us for letting the country get to this point. If we do so, God will hear our prayers and heal our land. This is one we're winning. The Democratic Party is self-destructing, committing suicide. All of its ideas don't work. Global warming is now being parked as a hoax, as it should be. Trump is withdrawing from the United Nations climate conventions. We're stopping to fund much of the United Nations. We should soon stop funding NATO. And Trump will secure Western security hemisphere security. And then Cuba and Iran are on, and Colombia. These are countries whose dictatorships are on the ropes. And I believe Trump will succeed in a massive way in pushing back the forces of evil that have brought the world close to a nuclear war. With God's help, we will succeed. And I do not believe God created this place to lose. In the end, God will win. Dr. Jerome Corsi, thank you for joining us. We'll be back, if not all more weekdays, we'll be running a program every day. Try to do new programs as many days every week as we can. Thank you for joining us. God bless.